We're on Parshat Vayechi, Genesis Unveiled, the 12th installment, and this is the final parsha of Breshit, of the book of Genesis. And this parsha will see the end of Jacob's life, and really is a parsha that wraps up much unfinished business that goes on in this complicated family. We will see Jacob finishing his business with Yosef, blessing Yosef's sons. We'll see him giving a personalized blessing to each of his own sons. We'll see him making his final arrangements that he should be buried in the land of Israel. And then at the end of the parsha, we'll have a very troubling scene between Yosef and his brothers of unfinished business between them. So it's really a parsha that is wrapping up not just the life of Yaakov, but the life of the patriarchs and the end of a whole period of Jewish history. It says, Vayechi, Yaakov lived 17 years in Egypt. And like the parsha of Sarah, the parsha that talks about Yaakov's death, it begins with Vayechi, and he lived. Now, the life that he lived in Egypt, those 17 years, was Vayechi. It was life. What does that mean? Remember, in Vayechi, Yaakov wanted to live in peace. And he didn't find that for another 20 years. But now it seems that in Egypt, at the end of his time, Yaakov finally does find some type of peace and solace and simply a nachas, satisfaction in his children and grandchildren. And the first thing he does is he calls in Yosef. It says that his age was going on. And he calls in Yosef to make sure that he will be buried in the land of Israel. And this is very interesting because many people make such arrangements. Is it the right thing to do? What is the significance of it? So the Talmud, interestingly, one of the rabbis says that all these people from outside of Israel, they come and they make the land tamim, make the land impure by being buried there. They put more dead bodies into the land. And even though that opinion in the Talmud is critical of it, perhaps it's a veiled criticism that the people should come not to die in Israel, but to live in Israel. And because we see that for Jacob, there was certainly an important spiritual importance to him being buried in the land. The Kabbalists say that it has to do with the unfolding of the soul's destiny and with the resurrection. But we see that certainly an important and a good thing to do, although not an obligation to do. Then we have something very strange. He makes Joseph swear that he will bring him to Israel. Now, why should Joseph have to swear this? Does he not trust him? So here we understand what we'll see later, is that when Yaakov dies, Yosef goes to Pharaoh and says, my father made me swear, I've got to go and bury him. So the significance is that Pharaoh might have been reluctant to let Yosef go. Yosef was his most valuable asset. So if Yosef says, though, I swore to my father, then there's no backing out. And sure enough, Pharaoh will yet let Yosef go. Okay. Now it says that Yaakov was sick, and he calls Yosef to come to him, to bring his sons. And Yosef brings his two sons to Yaakov, and Ephraim and Manasseh. And it's very reminiscent of the scene of Isaac's elderly blessing. It says Jacob's eyes were weak, he could not see, and so he brought the boys close and he hugged them. Now, similar to what Yitzchak did, and he asks, who are these? Who is this? Which leads us to question, how often did he see them? What was the relationship between Yosef and the rest of the family? It's not clear. It seems like there was not such a familiarity. They didn't visit every Sunday afternoon. They were in Goshen. Yosef was in the capital. And this is not, he's not terribly familiar with his grandsons. And so here we have the parallel to Yitzhak. He draws them close and he blesses them. The blessing he gives them is a blessing of the forefathers, but also the blessing that he says, may the angel who guarded me from all evil bless these young men and call my name in that call my name in them, and it's the name of my fathers. It's a very famous line. We say it before going to sleep with the Shema. Many songs have been written about it. We see also from here that there is such a thing as guardian angels. And we see that Jacob is kind of passing on that special protection and blessing to his grandsons. But here's where the parallel to the blessing of Isaac happens. Yosef lines up the boys with Ephraim opposite, Menashe, the older one, opposite Yaakov's right hand, and Ephraim, the younger one, opposite his left hand. And when Yaakov gives the blessing, he crosses his hands, he switches his hands. Yosef tries to push them back, which is also very shocking and surprising. Perhaps he thinks his father is not aware or doesn't see right, and he wants to make sure the right one gets the right blessing. Sounds familiar? But sure enough, Jacob says, Yadati bani yadati, I know, my son, I know. He says, this one too will be great, Menashe, the older one, but his younger brother will be even greater. So here we have it, a replaying of 4 generations of the younger son being promoted over the older one. Of course, the larger message is meritocracy. Why were they promoted? Because they were more fitting to be the firstborn, to be the leader, to be the prominent one. And, but we see how much discord that switch caused in the previous generations. Now, it then says, the Torah then says something very strange. It says that this is how you will bless the Jewish people. May God make you like Ephraim and Menashe. And interestingly enough, this is the blessing we give our sons Friday night. Unlike the daughters, where we bless them in the names of the matriarchs, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Our sons, we do not say the patriarchs, we say, may you be like Ephraim and Menashe. Why? So some of the commentaries want to say that because these 2 brothers were in harmony. They were not in conflict. They lived peacefully together. So it's a blessing of sibling harmony, which is not always easy to achieve, but it also accentuates the fact that after 3 generations of conflict of each son finding their place based upon who they are and their strengths, finally these brothers can make peace with it. But in effect, what Yaakov is doing is we will see in the next scene, because what he says to them is at the very beginning of this blessing, he says that these 2 sons, Ephraim and Menashe, will be like mine. In other words, they will be called according to their inheritance. They will receive a full portion of the land of Israel. So in effect, Ephraim and Menashe get promoted, and there are actually 13 tribes in Israel, not 12, but 12 of them got geographic gifts. The 13th, Levi, was spread amongst all the people. More about that later. But in effect, what is happening is that we will see that these brothers are becoming, in a sense, full tribes. And in the end, when all is done, Yosef receives a double portion over his other brothers. What is the double portion? The firstborn. So in a sense, Jacob is validating Yosef's dreams. Jacob is saying that ultimately Yosef is the one who is being given the final status of firstborn. And Yosef is the one he turned to make sure he's buried in the right place, although Yosef had this pull in Egypt. Maybe that's why he did it. But ultimately, it's the son of Rachel who seems to be taking the position of most importance and of the firstborn over the sons of Leah. So the final gift he gives to Joseph, besides promoting his sons, then he says, and I am granting to you Shechem, which you will get. Shechem, remember, is the portion that he bought, and then it had to be defended from the inhabitants. And it's where the matriarchs, where Shimon and Levi killed the inhabitants of Shechem. But ultimately, Jacob had bought this portion, and he gives, in a sense, the portion of Israel he was most connected to who? To Yosef. And Yosef's tomb is there to this day. It's a matter of big contention. I mentioned before that the places that the patriarchs bought are the most contended. And Yaakov gave it to Yosef, but today it's difficult to go pray there. You need the army. The army has to accompany them. The grave of Yosef was defaced during the Intifada. Torah scrolls were burnt. The structure was burnt. And it's a source of much contention, which is actually very sad that we do not have access to pray in our holy spots. So Jacob then was at his last moment. The next scene, he's about to die, and he calls all his sons around him this time. And he says, come, I will reveal to you what will be in the end of days. Now, this is very puzzling. What is going to happen? And actually, the rabbis say that he does not reveal that. God removes his prophecy. The end of days was not to be revealed, and instead he gives the blessings to each of his sons. Starts off Reuven saying that you are unstable, you are like unstable waters, and he criticizes him, veiled criticism over the fact that he let Yosef be taken. Remember, Reuven tried to save him unsuccessfully. And also over an incident that happened with the bed of Rachel after she passed away. Then he goes on to Shimon and Levi, the dynamic duo, remember, who wiped out Shechem, and he curses their anger. He does not tell them what they did was wrong, but he says that they were impulsive, and therefore they will be divided amongst the people of Israel. What does that mean? It means that they have to be separated. And not just that, but each of them is divided. How? Shimon is put within the tribe of Yehuda, in a sense, landlocked, surrounded by the tribe of Yehuda, the strongest tribe. And the Levites are spread amongst all the people in the whole country, and they don't get their own geographical inheritance. So it seems like these two had to be diffused. Their power had to be diffused. But as we know, Levi will be the Kohanim in the future, will descend from them. The blessing of Yehuda is also a very special one. Yehuda is given the blessing of kingship. Lo yasur shevet miYehuda. The staff will not be removed from Judah until Shiloh comes. What is Shiloh? The one that is his, that is God's. It's a reference to the Messiah. Of course, King David was from Yehuda. He established the line of kings, and the Messiah will have to be a descendant of David as well, of Yehuda. And also speaks about the abundance of wine in the portion of Yehuda, where there are vineyards to this day. The other important blessing is to Yosef. The blessing of Yosef is one of prosperity and also of strength, Yosef being the provider. The other sons are also blessed. Issachar will be like a donkey carrying its burden. There's a reference to Torah learning. Zvulun will plow the seas. They were the sailors. They were in Haifa and will be supporting his brother. And Dan will be a warrior, reference to Shimon, the great warrior. It's Shimshon, the great warrior. And so Jacob then wraps us his blessing to each of his sons. And it says that then he passes away. Joseph weeps, he mourns, and then he pulls it together. He goes to Pharaoh, gets permission to bring Jacob. Jacob is embalmed, which is very surprising, which generally do embalming. This was before the Torah was given, but it'll take time to make the arrangements and to bring him up. It says they stopped at the border of Israel. They mourned for 7 days, which is a source for the 7 days of mourning. And he was buried in Marat HaMachpelah. The Torah is very careful to emphasize that he was buried in the place where the other patriarchs were buried. So at the very end of the parsha, the last scene will be a very, in a sense, troubling scene, as we said. The brothers come to Yosef after Jacob dies, and they say, our father Jacob told us to tell you that after he dies, you should not take out your anger upon us. You should not take your vengeance upon us and for the wrongs that we have done. And they say, please forgive us the offenses we have done. And we are also servants of the God of Abraham. Now, very puzzling, because we don't see anywhere that Jacob told them this. Why are they saying this? What is unfolding? And what the Talmud tells us is that, in fact, Jacob never did tell them this. But they maybe thought that Yosef was like Esau. He's just waiting for the father to die to unleash all of his anger and all of his vengeance. But why would they think that? Yosef has only been good to them. They come down to Egypt. He sets them up in Goshen. He provides for them. He maybe doesn't see them that much, but seems to be on good terms. And of course, when Yosef revealed himself, he said to them, I don't hold this against you. What more would they want? So how do we understand this? And what I'd like to propose is this. We mentioned that when Yosef reveals himself, the brothers never fully apologize. And even if Joseph forgave them, they still should say they're sorry. And so, in a sense, the brothers are still carrying the guilt of what they did. They never did full tshuva. And so, perhaps, what we see from this is that they need to go through this process. Now, what is the process? So in psychology, there's something called projection, that you project your own feelings upon the other person. So in a sense, what is happening? They still felt guilty because they never did full tshuva and asked for forgiveness. And so they projected their feelings of guilt onto Yosef. If they feel guilty, it means Yosef still has it out for them. And so this is why they have these feelings. The Talmud says also that from this you see that you're allowed to lie to keep peace. The brothers want to keep harmony from Yosef. They also wanted to protect themselves, by the way. But nevertheless, this is allowed to do. And Yosef then turns to them and he says to them, he first cries that they should think such things of him and have such feelings. He sees that it's still not mended. And perhaps he's also crying over something else. When Yosef reveals himself, it says, Lo yachal lihitapek. He couldn't hold himself back. Earlier it says, Yitapek Yosef. He held himself back. And remember, he runs out of the room when they're talking to each other. He cries, he washes his face, goes back. So that implies that Yosef would have wanted to hold out longer. Why? Once again, perhaps because the brothers didn't completely do a complete tshuva. Remember, when Yosef frames them, they say, we didn't listen to our brother, but they never say, we made a wrong judgment about Yosef. We should have accepted the fact of these dreams. And so, this conflict between the sons of Jacob and sons of Rachel will continue in later history. First, you have the king, you have a civil war in the times of the judges between Benjamin and the other tribes. Then you have Saul from Benjamin king. Then you have David, Benjamin king. They're in conflict. And then later in the Jewish history, you will have the northern kingdom of Israel led by Ephraim, the grandson of Yosef, but a full tribe, in tension or in nemesis to the southern kingdom of Judah, the sons of Leah. And this rupture seems to not have been completely mended. And we see that coming out here. Even though Yosef says again, he says, you intended this for bad, but God brought about good. Interesting that he does bring up again that they have done wrong, maybe hoping to flush out more the nature of their apology. But they never come out and say, we never should have marginalized you. We never should have tried to kill you. They don't enumerate it. They should have. But he reiterates, I'll support you and your children. And it says he comforted them and he spoke to their hearts. So on a human level, he comforted them. But on a spiritual level, all the work was never done. And then he says, I will die. He died at 110 years, the youngest of the brothers to die. And he makes them promise to bring him up to Israel. Now, it won't be them. Seemingly, each generation kept this promise alive. And what the rabbis say is when all the Jews left Egypt, when they were all running around looking for the gold that the Egyptians were giving them and gathering it, Moshe went and got the ark of Yosef out of the Nile River. And they, for 40 years, it traveled with them to the Holy Land. And it also says, and so here we have the end of a book, the end of Genesis, the end of an era of the patriarchs and of the tribes. And we're told that it wasn't until the last of the brothers died, I believe Levi, it wasn't until then that the slavery started. Now, if you do the numbers, they were in Egypt 210 years. Yosef came at 17. He lived to 110. So they came down when he was 30, which means that there was 80 years from till Yosef died. If the slavery lasted 80 years out of the 210, that's 160. So there would have been 50 years after Yosef died, between Yosef died when Levi died, when they were still living in prosperity, still were not slaves. But eventually what happened was a new king arose that did not know Yosef, and everything will change. And so we'll begin the book of Exodus next week with our new series, Exodus Unveiled. Please join us again. And this ends the saga of Joseph and his brothers, and of the patriarchs, and of the entire book of Genesis. Shabbat shalom.